Today I'm doing a would you rather have the TM or the KTM. We're gonna break it down into a bunch of different categories and see which one comes out on top. Because these bikes are both fuel injected bikes, they're both oil injected bikes, they're both two strokes, they're supposedly both enduro bikes. Now KTM makes like 30 some thousand of these things, whereas TM only makes about 3,000 of these things. This is actually as close to apples as I can get, but it's an interesting thing because the TM is more of a handmade bike where a lot of the parts are made in-house, whereas KTM is making a lot of their parts in-house too, but this is like a mass-produced motorcycle, the XCW, and this is not a mass-produced bike over here, the TM. So I just want to go through and say, what have I learned over the last few months about owning these things? Which one would I rather own and why? Which I'll get to at the end of the video when we kind of like sum it all up. However, it probably should go without saying, but if you're watching this video before midnight on June 30th of 2023, you can enter to win both of these bikes because I'm giving them both away. Go to dirtbikechannel.com right now or click the link down in the description to get entered to win these bikes. Instead of starting with motors, let's start with frame and just the overall comfort and geometry of these bikes. And to me, the clear winner is the KTM. In that way, the KTM, I feel like I've got more room in the rider cockpit. I like how the foot pegs come out on an upward camber to help me be locked into the bike, but I just feel like I have a little bit more room, whereas on the Sherco, I feel a little bit more cramped. So as far as rider cockpit and frame and geometry, I'm giving it to the 23 KTM 300 XCW. Okay, so now we're gonna talk about motors, and I'm gonna break this up into a couple of different categories here because I think it's important to do that. So if we're just talking about the motors and as far as just the power delivery, okay? This is kind of like, this is a little bit of a tie here because the power delivery on the KTM is so smooth and so linear, and it doesn't vibrate at all. I mean, they basically don't vibrate at all. After 2017, KTM counterbalanced these things, and that feels amazing. There's no vibration, almost no vibration. On the TM though, it does vibrate more. It's similar to kind of what the older KTMs were, or even the quote counterbalanced betas and Shercos of today's day and age. The TM does vibrate more, but it has more of like a raw power, and it probably even does it feels like it makes a little bit more power. Now, I don't know that I need more power on these 300s, but that's why I'm saying this one is a little bit of a draw because I like how smooth and linear and no vibration of the KTM, but the guttural power, raw power out of the TM is something, it's a quantity all of its own. So I'm saying it's a little bit of a wash on power delivery for the motors. Next thing about the motors is the EFI systems. Now the TM is more of a throttle body. It is a throttle body fuel injection, and it's oil injected. So you put oil in a reservoir, you're just putting straight gas in both of the tanks. So you've got basically like a throttle body fuel injection on the TM, and you've got a TPI, the transfer port injection, on the KTM. And for the most part, what I've noticed is the KTM TPI bikes, there's some tuning required, where there isn't any tuning required over here that I've seen thus far on the TM. So I'd give the slight edge as far as tunability, or like just tune a bit, like it runs really, really great out of the box. I'm gonna have to give that to the TM. Third part of the motors though is, I want to talk about the power valve. So on the KTM, it's the old, this is still the old like mechanical power valve, which has springs inside there that you can adjust with like the preload on the springs. Whereas on the TM, it's an electronic power valve. It's a little bit of a fail though, because on the TM, it tries to do a power valve, the electronic power valve is recalibrating every time the electronics to the bike shut off. And so that's pretty annoying. You have to either install an arming switch on the bike to keep the ECU from knowing that it needs to reset the power valve ranges, or you have to wait for it to do its little thing. Whereas on the KTM, it's tried and true, and it's no mechanical, I mean, it's only mechanical, and so it just works. You get it set, and as soon as the bike starts, after it's warm, it's ready to go again. So I give that edge to the older technology here in the KTM versus the power valve here. So slight edge on big edge on the power valve to the KTM in that case. Let's talk about price. Both of these bikes are very expensive, and I did pay more, slightly more. I looked at the TM, a couple $100 more on the TM. A lot of people say KTMs are most expensive bikes out there. What I've noticed is a lot of the dealers are gouging you on KTMs by charging you BS shipping fees and BS freight charges and BS other charges. And so yeah, you can get quotes on a lot of these bikes that are very, very expensive. but I did pay a little bit more for the TM overall than I did the KTM, and I had to pay sales tax on both of them. So it's like, you gotta be careful, but those dealers charging all these BS freight fees and all this other stuff is super upsetting. Let's talk about the brakes. So the brakes on both bikes, it's a little bit of a draw here because on the front brakes, you have the Brembo brakes on both brakes, or on both bikes, which I like a lot. It's my favorite front brake. You have a Brembo on the rear of the KTM and you have a Nissan on the rear of the TM. I don't like the Nissan brakes as much, especially on the front, but on the rears, I can't really tell a difference. And so I'm saying that's a draw. Let's talk about clutches though, because both bikes sport Brembo clutches, but you can tell just by pulling the clutch right here that the KTM is an easier clutch to pull. And you could say, well, the KTM is going to wear out faster. I have not known any of these KTM clutches to wear out fast. They're absolutely phenomenal. As far as like the clutch plates inside. So I give the edge there to the KTM because it's easier to pull the clutch on the KTM than it is on the TM, even though they're both Brembos. So there's something about the TM makes the clutch pull a little bit harder. So I'd rather have the KTM. Let's talk about air filters because we're gonna be doing maintenance. Now it's so much easier to swap the air filter on the KTM because it's a toolless air filter. You just pull the side cover off with no tools and then you can pull out that filter. Whereas on the TM, you're gonna have to use an Allen wrench, pull out 2 bolts to get the seat off, and then it's a little bit awkward to get that air filter in and out on the TM. So it's a clear advantage on air filter changes over to the KTM. Okay, so let's talk about forks and suspension. Now, this is a little bit of a tricky one for me. And I'm gonna, just out of total fairness, I don't know which way to go. I hate the fact that on the KYB, you have clickers that are directly under your bars most of the time, so you can't really get at them. And I do think that the TM is valved too stiff for enduro riding. However, the KTM is very soft fork, and a lot of guys are going to be able to just ride this right out of the box if they're doing slower enduro stuff. But and it does have finger clicker, so I like that. But there's less adjustability on this open cartridge. This is the last version of the KTM 48 millimeter exact. I'm not exact. The Explorer, the 48 millimeter open cartridge Explorer fork. This is the last bike that they put this on, essentially. And there's a limitation on what you can do as far as revalving this without putting different cartridges inside there. And so for that one, I'm gonna maybe give the slight edge over to the TM just because every suspension tuner out there knows how to make a KYB fork, how to revalve the KYB fork. I do think this needs to be revalved. But also there's a bunch of people that are probably also gonna wanna revalve the WP fork, and people are gonna have a better time revalving, and just there's more people that know about revalving like these you know, the KYB fork is what I'm trying to say. So even though in the stock form I like the plushness of the KTM a little bit better, and I like the fact that it has finger clickers, a lot of guys are going to revalve them anyway, and in that case it's probably going to go to an edge on the KYB because there's more adjustability with that technology there. Here's an easy one for the TM. It's got a kickstart. So they both have electric start, but the TM still has the backup kickstart, and I know it's important to a lot of people. It is important to me. I've never been stranded because I didn't have a kickstart, but I just have to call out the fact that the TM has electric start and a kickstart, so that's a win in its corner. Let's talk about aftermarket parts and availability. This is a clear winner for the KTM. There's a million things, there's a million KTMs out there, and so there's a clear winner here. It's much easier to get parts, and there's a plethora of aftermarket parts available for the KTMs where you will have a harder time getting parts and finding aftermarket parts for the TM, even just like skid plates or things like that, or radiator braces. It's a clear winner for the KTM. Let's talk about Resale. Resale, it's gonna be a clear winner on the KTM as well. The TM is more of a boutique bike. It's more of a fringe, if you will, bike out there. It's gonna be harder to find this one initially, and it's gonna be harder to sell it initially than it will be a KTM. So if it's your first bike and you're not really sure, you know, or you're not 100% convinced that you wanna be in dirt bikes, the TM is probably not the one for you. Get the one that's more mass produced, the one that is in higher demand to buy and to sell, and that's gonna be the KTM in this case. They both have kickstands. I don't love how the kickstand is kind of hokey where it'll flip up on the TM as soon as the weight comes off of it. But this is the last version of the kickstand that I didn't like on the KTMs either, because it has this little screw that is hooked. The screw that hooks the little spring in here on the KTM, it is notorious for coming out. And so I don't love either one of these kickstands. I'm glad they both have them, but it's a draw because I can find problems with both of them. KTM has fixed this kickstand issue on the newer generation bikes, the 24s, the 23XEs and the 24XEWs, they've fixed that. But I didn't love the kickstands on either one of them. Hey, and if we're talking about, another thing talking about suspension is the KTM does have the PDS style suspension, which if you're doing off-road stuff and harder enduro stuff, I think the PDS does offer some advantages over the linkage style that you'd find on motocross bikes and this TM, because the PDS is lighter with less things to maintain and less things to hook up on, and then you don't need to have a skid plate that covers the linkage. So I do think for hard enduro stuff, the KTM with the PDS does offer some advantages there. Let's talk about Radiator fans. The Radiator fan came stock on the TM, so that's a win for the TM because I've yet to have a factory installed Radiator fan from KTM, even though I think they should. I think some of the like pro models or hard, I don't even know, like Ayresburg editions or whatever they are, some of those do come with fans, but the base level bikes don't, whereas this TM did. Although, as far as we're talking about radiators, I do feel like the radiators are more exposed and more susceptible to being damaged on the TM than they are on the KTMs. After about 2020, I stopped putting radiator braces and guards on these KTMs because they just don't really get bent. They don't really hit anything. And so I would give the edge a little bit over as far as radiator placement to the KTM over the TM on that case. Lastly, the last thing I think I'm going to mention is just looks of the bikes. Now, I do love the unique look of the TM, and this is totally subjective to me, but I hate the Cyclops headlight here, and I'm just not a super big fan of white plastic on bikes. I don't like it. I don't love this white fender here on the KTM. I don't love the white fender on that other KTM over there. I prefer when they'll do an orange fender. I don't love all the white on the TM. I'd rather see a blue fender and blue side panels and maybe just some white accents. You know, if they had white accents up here on the tank and stuff. But for me, I would take this off. I would want to put maybe just like a number plate or just some other headlight that isn't so ugly and isn't so much white. So that's, you know, maybe me nitpicking, but I like solid colors and I don't like whites. So I actually prefer the look of this older 23 KTM. Even though I've seen it a lot, I do prefer the look of it over the TM. I will say though that the rims, the wheels on the TM, these blue wheels on the TM, that is super trick. And so it's not like the bike is ugly or anything. I just don't love the white and the headlight. So I have to say in the looks department. And this isn't the stock headlight, obviously, for the KTM, but the stock headlight looks very similar to this, but better look on that headlight than this headlight. So yeah, for me, for my money, I would pick the KTM over the TM, just with all of those things. I just think there's nobody that's making a bike with more polish than KTM. Now, this is the last version of the TPI bike, that type of injection, and now it's moving on to the throttle body fuel injection, which I'll have a 24, I have a 24XC right over there, and I'll have a 24XCW very soon. But I would still take this bike over the TM for my primary bike. Sorry to have to say that, but it's true. Thanks for watching these videos. If you don't have entries for this yet, if you're still watching at the end of this video, you're crazy because this has been really long. And yeah, I'm giving both these bikes away, and this video is probably coming out on the 30th or so of June, so you just have until midnight tonight probably. If you're watching this after that time, I do sweepstakes, you know, here periodically, and I'll be giving other bikes away. The drawing for this thing will happen sometime in July when we get all the data and all the finals and everything figured out. So that's what I got for you. Use my links to Rocky Mountain ATV, not only to get entries for this sweepstakes, but just to support this stuff in general. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, leave a single track.